Hello and welcome to Movie Marathon Mood. It's the show where we watch a bunch of movies and then we talk about them. It's as simple as that. On this episode, we're going into the third and fourth installments in the Indiana Jones series. What was once called the Indiana Jones trilogy is now four and upcoming five movies, but we're talking the third and fourth movies on this episode, The Last Crusade and also Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. We talk about where they stand in the series for us and what we think about the series as it moves forward. It's all right here on Movie Marathon Mood. Stick around.
The Holy Grail, Dr. Jones.
Oh, rats.
This is it. Look, the shield is the second marker. We found it.
Indiana Jones is on the quest of a lifetime. But for some adventures, one Jones is not enough.
Dad? Junior?
Those people are trying to kill us.
I know, Dad!
It's a new experience for me.
Happens to me all the time.
Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Hi, everyone. Jesse Gilstrap here, joined by my pal, Drew Cordell. Drew, my friend, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing well, Jesse. How about yourself?
Doing fine. And here we are for another couple great adventures. And I mentioned before, I'll mention briefly again, we start with The Last Crusade, Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, the first movie that I ever remember seeing in a movie theater. And that obviously makes this movie have a special place in my heart. And at the same time, I think we'll get into a little bit of criticism that I've had over time in ways that this movie has changed for me. Not that any of these, I don't think personally, any of the Indiana Jones movies are bad, but I also just learned to say any of the Indiana is a bit of a tongue twister.
Right.
But I've also seen people in recent memory with the 40th anniversary of Raiders really dig into Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So we'll also get to talk about that after talking about Last Crusade, because I've seen people just completely dismiss that movie and they're like, I guess I'll have to own it if I buy the box set. Did I have to include it? And I find that perspective interesting in consideration of Indy and with the future of Indy as well, that's now being set with the sequel, the fifth movie being shot.
Right.
But we start with Last Crusade, and I think the most obvious first thing to mention is that Sir Sean Connery joins.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much as perfect as you'd imagine it being. It's the one aspect of the movie that I immediately think of. If I think about Last Crusade, I think, how could you possibly have Indiana Jones and not have Connery as his dad?
Right.
Like, that's just, wouldn't trade that for anything. That's perfect. And it's for many reasons. I mean, on its own, if they just decided to cast Connery, it'd be pretty perfect. But then there's the obvious connection of Spielberg saying he wanted to make a Bond movie and Lucas saying, I got something better.
Right.
And it was Indiana Jones. Well, how about the original James Bond coming in to play Indy's father? And alongside that notion, something that we mentioned when we talked about Never Say Never Again is that Connery's not afraid to be the older guy.
No.
At all. And he's not just James Bond. He's definitely Indy's dad. He's older and he's not the adventurer that his son is.
Right.
And he's much more the academic type, which is obviously one of those fun things if you think that this isn't exactly archaeology the way it normally
Right.
the way it really would be. And I like that kind of joke, especially especially if you think about Indy is a professor too,
Right. Yeah.
and, which is something that definitely pays off throughout the franchise. Like Indy knows his stuff. He knows his culture and his history, and that's helped him in various capacities. But at the same time, he goes off for swashbuckling adventure. His dad is not that type, really.
No.
And I really love their dynamic tremendously. It really is the heart of this movie. I will say, I think people sometimes have a tendency, and I'm not trying to say people do and don't like, that they don't really care for something, but if they do, because obviously plenty of people love this movie, and I'm not saying they don't genuinely love it, but I think it's interesting. You take one aspect of a movie, and sometimes people make that the movie. To me, The Last Crusade is definitely not a bad movie. I'm not leading that direction at all, but I probably like this one less than a lot of people too. And that's really changed with time. Like when I was a kid, I thought it was awesome. I loved the whole trilogy, really. And I became an adult and watched it again, and I started picking at certain little aspects of it more. And as much as I love that father son dynamic, and I do, there are other things that I don't care for quite as much, or that I don't think are as strong. Things that feel like, yeah, they really didn't want to do Temple of Doom again. They're wanting to repeat notes of Raiders a lot, but maybe not quite as well. We're almost kind of really forcing that direction. And one of the things that I like in Raiders and Temple of Doom that I don't think is as well done in Last Crusade is the feeling of really being in like the different tombs or locations. I don't really get the same sense of being in a dark spiderweb filled environment. It feels a lot more like sets, and that impression just keeps hitting me, that it doesn't feel on a production level like they did as much effort. And immediately I think about the finale as if, for instance, which is a unique finale, but it really kind of ups the ante in terms of ending as analogy as opposed to feeling like a legit room of traps, and like starting with like the penitent man, which of course, oh, you got to kneel and roll too when they go into that space. It's really like everybody's just kind of like looking, and they can still actually see it happen.
Yeah.
And it's like they barely had to go anywhere, and Andy's like, I'm fine, made it. And he's just yelling right around the corner. But for some reason, those blades stop when he successfully does it, but they reset when the other people didn't make it. But they stop so that the other characters can just walk in,
Right.
which is way too convenient. And then he's trying to spell out Jehovah, and you accidentally step on the wrong stone, and it just falls down into a huge abyss. Who resets those? How do the other guys get across? I actually can buy the bridge more as an optical illusion kind of thing. I'm fine with that one. But ultimately, my point is like, start leaning too heavily into, I don't know, like being a little too convenient. And even little things like when Allison Duty's reaching for the Grail, Indy's holding her hand and tries to stop her, but she just can't resist and ends up falling. which causes him to fall a little bit, and his dad grabs his hand, and the same scenario plays out. Except Indy decides eventually to reach back up. And that's bizarre to me. I can almost reach it, Dad. Like, you were just telling her not to. I get it in terms of metaphor, but there are little things like that that I wish were better developed, that don't feel as lived in. And some of that movie feels that way to me. Like, there are things that I absolutely love and adore in a movie. Whenever they're doing their escape, they've been tied to the chairs and they make their escape. I don't know why they had to rush out so immediately on the bike. They send the boat off, convince them that they were on a boat, but then before they can even be chasing a boat, they take off out of the box on the bike.
Right.
Like, why didn't you just wait a little longer? That's kind of weird. But the scene itself is fun and
Right.
not as good as the chase in Raiders, but it's fun. And then you have the fun moment where Connery chases off the birds and it crashes the plane, which feels like the pseudo non-violent solution, but it's actually incredibly violent.
Right.
Kills a lot of birds.
Right.
But yeah, this movie has an interesting balance to me of things I really enjoy and things that I don't think are quite as well developed. And I don't want to sound too harsh on it, but I also truly don't put it in the same category as I do the first two movies either. And another little thing I'll just throw in there in terms of my quick opinion is Denholm Elliott, who I think is really terrific. He's a great actor. And obviously, once again, going back to Raiders and pulling in elements from Raiders. And in between Raiders and Last Crusade, he was actually nominated for an Oscar. This guy's a great actor, and I like him. But throughout the movie, as Brody, I feel like he gets way more absurd, like way too bumbling. I don't understand why they made the character that way. To me, he gets way too silly as time goes on, as they're trying to find him. They tried to rope all the characters in where they're a part of the chase and the adventure, as if it's not just Indy and his dad, it's also Brody and it's also Sala, and everybody's together. But I don't think they do a tremendous job of giving everybody something interesting to do. It almost feels too convenient. And like I said, Brody specifically becomes too silly, and they don't do enough with Sala.
Right.
Almost like he didn't even need to be there at all in terms of developing a reason for him to be there. And one of the best moments that I could think of with all the characters is when they think Indy has gone over the cliff. And it's one of the best moments involving the group when Indy walks up and it's just like, hey, what are you guys looking at? And it also leads to a nice moment again between Indy and his dad. That's a funny scene, but also a really good scene with emotional connection. And I think that's what keeps happening with this movie. It has that back and forth. I just get the feeling, personally, that Spielberg wasn't as inspired to tell this story outside of the father-son relationship, which obviously he has a long history relationship with his own dad, but also making that part of his stories.
Right.
In various capacities. The thing that feels the most true in this movie is the father-son relationship. But I don't think the adventure and some of the details of the world are as well executed. And that's kind of my overall immediate opinion about Last Crusade. And now I have to give, after I sounded maybe overly harsh. See what your take is on this third Indy adventure.
Well, before I get too far, I just got to counter the one thing you said about the blades. That Indy actually pulled a rope and tied it off that stopped the blades from working right there as he passed through.
There you go.
So it actually make that part make sense.
I missed that detail.
I can't really argue the logic. I can't argue the logic about the letters, though. Other than maybe nobody ever made it past the blades, and the knight maybe put the letters back on after they made it the first time. I can't argue that one too hard, but yeah, that was the one thing. But I don't completely disagree with you though about a lot of your criticisms because I have similar ones. Uh, maybe that don't bother me as much as you, but I still kind of view as I don't want to use the word problem, but things that take this one down just a peg for me. And I do want to start out with the negative stuff first because I have a lot of positive things to say about this one. Because I do really enjoy it still, and I for a long time when I was younger, this was definitely one of my favorites. And like I said, I didn't watch Temple of Doom as much growing up. As a child, I watched Raiders and Last Crusade the most, and there's good reason for that. Not that Temple of Doom isn't accessible because it is, and it's very fun and it's very enjoyable, but it also has some really it has more of a reputation for some really violent and dark things, although it does have those things in it as well. Um, but I do think it's a little more balanced. But the Raiders and Last Crusade are definitely much more liked, not only in terms of tone, but also just in the aesthetic itself. But I do think that this one, the where it's lacking the most, is in the sense of adventure. And like in Raiders and Temple of Doom, you feel like you're caught up in the adventure the whole time. It's a frenetic pace that keeps going and going. Last Crusade has a much more leisurely pace. And I don't think that's terrible. It's not, it doesn't make the movie bad at all. But I think what makes the first two so good, especially Raiders, is just it has this non-stop drive to the plot. Whereas Crusade, it's kind of, a little more by the numbers. And we've got some time in Venice. I'm not saying it's dragging, but I don't think it's moving at the pace that maybe it should be, and that the plot is as driven as the plot in the first film, where we got to find this arc before the Nazis do, and you have the urgency in it. And while it's the essentially the same plot device where you have the Nazis after the Holy Grail, I think it's not, for some reason it's just not as urgent. It doesn't feel nearly as urgent because who knows what powers, if someone in the wrong hands were able to do with it. But the Holy Grail, what it gives you eternal life. And while you certainly wouldn't want certain people to have eternal life, I don't necessarily know what would make that so much different. thing as having like what could be this ultimate weapon, religious history and mythology that would terrify anyone if someone used it, being the Ark. And the Holy Grail, I don't think is quite the same. Now, it is an archaeological wonder, something that people and stories and myths and the King Arthur legends have been alluding to for, hundreds, thousands of years now. So it definitely is a great archaeological find to throw in here. But I think the use of it, ends up being a retread of Raiders, and it doesn't work quite the same way. I also agree about Marcus Brody, and I love Denham Elliott, and I love Marcus Brody. I do think they made him too much of a joke, and even though I enjoy a lot of those scenes, specifically, like I enjoy his chemistry with Sean Connery because when they're on the tank together, I enjoyed those aspects of his comedic performance a lot better than like him bumbling around and getting captured by the Nazis with Sala earlier in the movie. But it is kind of weird and random that they just decided to make him uh, the comedic character, or a comedy relief. Also, Sala is a little more of that too, and that he's not nearly as, he had some funny moments in Raiders for sure. And, John Rhys-Davies is great, and I like him in this movie. I like he's charismatic, and I like the character Sala, but he's also kind of more of a bumbling fool as well. You have the thing with the camels where Indy tells him no camels, and he brings five or however many it is, and it ends up kind of being a joke, but it kind of diminishes him a little bit. And I don't know. I don't fully agree with the route they went for that. I think maybe they were playing too much into the, oh, we're going to have a lot of humor with Indy and his father. So we're just going to have a lot of humor with the other characters as well. And I think they may have just gone a bit too far with that. And also, before I start getting to what I really like about the movie, I do think that Elsa, Allison Duty, I think she's the weakest of the Jones girls. I think, not that I think she's terrible. I don't think her character is written that well, and that she's just kind of along for the ride a lot, and then we're supposed to believe that she's involved with the Nazis, and then it's not very convincing, and then all of a sudden she's still sympathetic, or supposed to be. And I don't really care for that part of the story, um, either. I do like things about the ending, but I'll get to that later. But like her as a whole, I'm just not crazy about her, and a lot of the scenes that I don't feel have like the same punch, like in Raiders, like building up to before we even get to the arc, before the arc's even found, you have like these little action scenes kind of thrown in where you've got the Nepal bar shootout, you've got the basket chase in the market. Some of the best action scenes in the whole series. And in Last Crusade, you've got the stuff in Venice, and I don't think it's bad, but it doesn't have the same kind of punch to it that the stuff in Raiders does. And like the boat chase and all that, it's fun, but those aspects kind of fall flat in a lot of ways to me. And part of it involves her because just, we have this character that I'm not that crazy about. And I do agree with you also about, locations in this movie feeling more like sets, um, or at least, more standard sets, and not just completely taking you to another place. And even though it's the same cinematographer, Douglas Slocum, did a excellent job on the other two movies. I don't think this one looks nearly as good as the other two. It almost looks too clean.
And bright.
Yeah, and that's another problem I have is that like the aesthetic of it, just aesthetically, it doesn't appeal to me as much as the other two. But having said all that, I love the beginning of this movie, and you mentioned convenient coincident coincidences, and uh, there's a lot of them in the opening, but I still love it. I saw somebody, the critic Vern. I don't know if anyone has read any of his reviews. If you haven't, you should. He's really, really cool guy. Find him at Outlaw Vern on Twitter. He never really cared for this portion of Last Crusade, and he doesn't hate the movie, but he's not as crazy about it as a lot of people, and he thinks that the nuking the fridge is more realistic than Indy getting all the stuff that makes him Indy in the same day, which is really funny to me. And I don't necessarily disagree because it is pretty far fetched that all that's iconic, the stuff that makes him iconic, just he gets in the same like 10-minute stretch. But there's just something about that opening that's so fun and kind of the spirit of adventure, and it sets up the relationship with his father. But River Phoenix plays the young Indiana Jones, and we talked about how there have been other actors that have played Indiana Jones, despite the whole Harrison can be the only Indiana Jones argument that people like to make. And of course, he passed away not too long after that, a few years after that. A very talented actor that left us too soon, tragically. But I really like him as young Indiana Jones, and I like that he didn't try to completely imitate Harrison, but he had the spirit of the character down. And I really enjoy that, and that's kind of what gets me so invested in it, and it makes me believe it. I'm more invested in the hunt for the Cross of Coronado than I am the Holy Grail in a lot of ways, just because of the way he sells it, the way he invests in it, and I enjoy the chase and the uh, run around on the train and all the the circus train and all the animals and all the gags with that, and it's really funny to me. I really enjoy the rhinoceros poking through the roof, and holy smokes, that part is so great. I enjoy it. The snakes, it's a little on the nose to have him gain his fear of snakes right then. And of course, he was with his friend earlier and picked up the snake and was like, "It's only a snake." So we knew he wasn't afraid of snakes at that point. But then he gets covered in them and is all of a sudden afraid of them. It's again a little far fetched, but I think he sells it, and I enjoy the leader of the gang of bandits that ends up giving him the hat. I like who's just referred to as Fedora in the credits, I believe. I really kind of enjoy him. I enjoy kind of his begrudging respect uh, for Indy, and I think it kind of has a cool emotional payoff there, because it's like you've gotten the sense that Indy and his dad are not connected very well, just from the little scene you barely have with Sean Connery talking and you not seeing him. And then this guy ends up being more of a father figure to him, like in that moment. And it kind of sets up the dynamic between him and Sean from the beginning. I think that the Indy and Henry dynamic is what makes this movie what it is, and I agree with you on that. I do think it is the strongest aspect of this movie. And I also love the choice they made, because really, you're right. The obvious choice was to go with Sean Connery, to go with James Bond, because that's who inspired Indiana Jones to exist in the first place. And to have Connery be his dad just makes sense. But I also think they could have done it differently, and I don't wish they would have. I think they did it the perfect way. But they could have had him be more suave. They could have had him be more James Bond and be a little more adventurous and be more like Indy. And I'm glad that they did not do that. And that may have been a temptation, but they made him more professor like and bumbling to a degree, and not used to being out in the field. And I think that dynamic makes the movie fun. I think the movie kind of, like I said, I'm not really a big fan of the section where they're in Venice, and it's really not until Henry's in the movie fully that I'm kind of fully on board with it again. And it's not that I hate that section, but it's just not my favorite. And but once they're in the castle, Henry Jones breaks that vase on Andy's head. I'm kind of into it again, and I enjoy that fireplace scene probably way too much, because it makes me laugh every time I see it, and I've seen it countless times, but it never ceases to crack me up. And I think that Harrison and Sean had a really great chemistry, and they really sold the father son relationship. And as someone who doesn't see eye to eye with their father all the time, it definitely, I think that aspect of the movie is stronger to me than ever has been. And I think that part is something that just kind of gets better with age, and kind of naturally so. And you pointed out Spielberg really likes to focus on troubled father son relationships, and the good and the bad, in a lot of his movies. And I definitely think he was more honed in on that as well in this than he was the rest of it. I don't think George Lucas was too crazy about doing it this way either, because he wanted to go a completely different direction and do like a haunted house type movie, and also like earlier, before Crystal Skull, he had wanted to do possibly aliens, uh, some way, shape, form, or fashion with this one, in the early concepts. But they kind of went with everybody not being crazy about the way Temple of Doom went. They wanted to do something a little more like Raiders, so they decided to do something just like Raiders. And they got Jeffrey Boehm to write the screenplay, and of course we've talked about him a lot on our show, because we talked about Lethal Weapon 2 and 3, which he wrote or had some part in, and The Lost Boys. And I think he's I think he had a talent for character and adventure, and I think he was pretty good what he did, even though he did some stuff I'm not crazy about, particularly Lethal Weapon 3. But I think he was a strong person to go with. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of this is kind of retreading and kind of back to square one, kind of doing Raiders all over again. And in ways that's fun, but in other ways, I feel like it could have been done better. It could have made the father son stuff really sink in more with a better plot, with a better story. I do think I actually enjoyed the last section of the movie quite a bit. So I'm not as hard on it as far as that goes. Especially, I really like that tank chase. I think that's probably my favorite action bit in the whole movie. It's got some fun gags that, like Indy shooting through like the three Nazis with the one gun. That part's kind of different and fun and kind of along the same spirit of like pulling the gun and shooting the swordsman, but it done in a different way. Like there's some inspired stuff with that. I really enjoy the action there, and I really enjoy that scene where they're on the cliff that you mentioned, because I think when the relationship between them needs to have those moments that are not just comedy, but and not just conflict, but the actual connection that they still have. I think those are the strongest points of the movie, and we get it here, and we get it in the climax. I I really enjoy the little set because that's what it is essentially. I do wish that the resting place of the Grail had a little more better aesthetic to it. I wish they had kind of done more production wise with it, but I do like that whole ending with the booby traps and with Indy having to get in there to save his father. And I think that there is a little more urgency with this portion of the story than with the rest. And it actually gives high stakes to the Grail more so than just not letting the Nazis get it. And I think my favorite one probably is the bridge, because that is a really cool moment, and I really enjoy the music in and of course John Williams does a great job. But I don't know, the music in this one maybe isn't as inspired um, as the other two, but there's still a lot of good stuff in it. John Williams is gonna do a pretty good job no matter what. Um, but I think he does a really good job in some certain moments here. Um, We've got to talk about Julian Glover, because he plays Donovan, and I think he does an okay job. I do think the character is kind of one note, that um, I think he's probably the least of the villains in the whole series, and I don't think that he's a bad villain. In the same way, I didn't think he was a bad Bond villain either. I just think there could have been more to him, because I think he's a great actor. Um, but I do think that Donovan's just kind of, well, at this moment he's good. He's setting up the meeting. Oh, he's a Nazi, so he's just a villain now, and there's just really not much to him other than that. But it is kind of satisfying to see him just become a skeleton right before your eyes. That part of it is not as gruesome as the heads exploding in Raiders, and not nearly as satisfying. But it is still a little satisfying, and it's cool visual effect. And I enjoy the knight. I really like the knight that protects the Grail. Um, and I love his interactions with Indy, and I just love the Grail. I love the simplicity of what it looks like, and the choices. I do like that aspect of the ending too. I do think that I do think the moment when Indy ends up trying to save Elsa, um, it's kind of hit and miss for me because I don't really care about Elsa and she's reaching for the Grail and he's like desperately trying to save her. I don't know why, in a way, because it's just the relationship just wasn't there. But when Indy ends up on the ledge and he's reaching for it, that does hit me in a certain way, just because of what ultimately happens and the connection between him and his father is reestablished for good. And of course, you got him riding off in the sunset, and a lot of people thought that was the end, and it wasn't. And the next one wasn't either because we've got one coming up. But for a long time, a lot of people thought that was the end. I've always liked Last Crusade. I think it's fun. I think it's enjoyable, and I always like watching it. There are a lot of people that view it as their favorite indie, and I understand why to a degree. Like I definitely know it's the Connery aspect, like you said. It's kind of cherry picked. That's probably the reason that that everybody loves it because the relationship between Indy and his dad, and that's a big selling point of the movie. And there is a lot of good to it. Um, but I do have this one down just a peg from Raiders and Temple of Doom because I do think that they are better movies, especially Raiders. But I still hold this in pretty high regard. I give it a solid A. I do, I still think it's a pretty good movie. I think it's the the strengths are there. I think there's a lot of stuff I really enjoy about it that I think delivers. There are a few things that fall a little short, but I feel like the core of what makes it good and succeeds.
Thinking about the opening and really moments throughout, this movie is clearly the biggest reference for Solo, a Star Wars story.
Yeah,
That was obvious even from the trailers for Solo. Like, oh yeah, they're going for young Indiana.
right.
It makes sense. But yeah, it's quite interesting. And River Phoenix is terrific in the part, and was previously with Harrison in Mosquito Coast.
Right.
Reason Harrison thought of him for being in Last Crusade as the young Indy, working with him on Mosquito Coast. Now a series on Apple TV Plus, but not our sponsor. But yeah, there's a lot of there are a lot of little details that are good in the movie and that are fun. And I certainly wouldn't trade a movie for anything. I think it's a solid, good movie. Just aspects of it that bother me. One of them is also the Brotherhood protecting the Holy Grail, and they're chasing on the boats,
Right.
and they're like shooting and wanting to kill, and then uh, next thing you know, they get one captured, and let's talk about why we're actually the good guys. And oh, you're just wanting to get your father? Well, go ahead then. Like, man, you guys were super adamant about stopping anybody from getting anywhere close to the Grail just a few moments ago.
Right.
And now you're like, oh, you're just wanting to find your dad? Yeah, cool. Uh, now that we've had this quiet moment on a boat that's fallen apart,
Right.
which I do like just the detail, like when they're on the boat and he's threatening that guy in the Brotherhood, and you have the boat just being slowly taken apart.
Yeah.
I like that as a stunt detail. I just wish I cared for the story around these details more, like the plot that got us to this point.
Right.
Everything's just a little bit too light and a little bit undercooked for me. I think that's a lot of what this comes down to. And like you mentioned too, Julian Glover is like kind of. I mean, he's fine, but the character is, eh. Okay, can you explain his motivation or who he is a little bit more? Because I feel like I understand the villains elsewhere in the Indy series more. This movie doesn't have that same sense of driving plot. I think when you're mentioning that, that's kind of a lot of what bothers this movie. Bothers me about this movie the most is it doesn't have the same propulsion, and it feels too light and loose,
Right.
and too much like it's trying to reset things. That's definitely on my mind as I'm watching it, that they're facing backlash to Temple of Doom. And it's like, sure, but then just do a story that you develop. And I feel like this is the beginning of them running into problems behind the scenes. Not that they were ugly towards each other, but everybody having disagreements about what the story should be.
Right.
It took a long time to get the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as well, because they were having so many conversations about what should the story be. I don't know that anything did or didn't get heated, but I don't get the impression that it was heated behind the scenes. But it does feel like everybody started questioning everything a little bit too much.
Right.
The Raiders was like out of the gate, pretty much agreement, and Temple of Doom doesn't happen that long after, just a few years, but a few more years, a couple more years between Temple of Doom and Last Crusade.
Right.
And that could be for a number of reasons, but you can't help but think that they were having a lot of debates behind the scenes. What should Indy be? And obviously, to a certain degree, how do we wrap it up? And at the same time, uh, I think it's worth mentioning they talked about doing not a trilogy, but maybe 5 movies. And now it looks like we might actually just have 5 Indy movies.
Right.
We'll have to see what happens when we actually do have 5. That is an interesting thing. I mean, riding into the sunset doesn't have to mean an ending. It can be an ending of one story. It's a pretty iconic way of ending a movie, but it does feel like an ending at the same time. It has that kind of added weight with the introduction of Indy's father. A lot of times, stories that close will also go back to the beginning, which is what happens here at the beginning of Last Crusade, is seeing a young Indiana. But yeah, I definitely don't want to sound too harsh on this movie. At the same time, I go to a solid B. So a solid B is a pretty steep drop from an A in terms of personal impressions. But I definitely won't shy away from watching this movie anytime it's on. And if I'm watching the Indiana Jones movies, it's not like I'm thinking, God, I got to watch Last Crusade. And no, I enjoy it. I enjoy it a great deal. And more than anything, I like watching it to see Sean Connery and Harrison Ford and their dynamic together. That works a lot. I really like when they're on the blimp, no ticket.
Yeah.
But even just leading up to that, where Connery's reading a paper upside down, it's just really fun to watch their dynamic play out throughout the whole movie. But I end up, like I said, on a solid B for Last Crusade. And before we talk about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I'll say, for what it's worth, Last Crusade is probably my least favorite Indiana Jones movie. Me and the controversy controversial opinion. I'm sorry to all the people that truly hate Kingdom of the Crystal Skull or love Last Crusade, but I really enjoy Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Legend says that a crystal skull was stolen from a mythical lost city in the Amazon, supposedly built out of solid gold, guarded by the living dead. Whoever returns the skull to the city temple will be given control over its power.
You will help us find it.
Don't touch anything.
What's he gonna do now?
I don't think he plans that far ahead.
I'd cover my ears if I were you.
And among the things that I love, we go to the 1950s, and just like the originals, all the Indiana Jones movies are inspired by serialized stories. If you're going to do the same sort of thing in the 1950s, it would be that kind of sci-fi alien aesthetic.
Right.
A lot of the science fiction movies that you would see in the 1950s, I think it's a pretty perfect MacGuffin. And I understand why some people balk at it and think this doesn't feel like Indy. But I very much argue against that. I think it's perfect for Indy to go that direction. And on top of that, if you're gonna once again bring up Nuke the Fridge, I love that sequence. I love the whole opening stretch of the movie up to the iconic shadow introduction of Indy putting on the hat.
Yeah.
The Easter egg of being in the warehouse that turns out to be Area 51. You see the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
Use of various metals to see where the mysterious magnetized case is, and it turns out, of course, immediately to be, well, I don't think it's explicitly tell you it's an alien, but I think you get the grasp very quickly that it's an alien. You see the hand when they cut it open.
Yeah.
Lot of fun details and a great fun action sequence that follows all of that. I think it's hilarious when they get kind of blasted off all off on that track.
Right.
And then Indy rushes off and stumbles into that conveniently about to be blasted town. As far as bad timing goes, it's pretty bad timing. It's also right when they're going to do a nuclear test.
Right.
Who is doing the nuclear test? Who's conducting it? People at the base? Well, the base was just massacred. So I don't know that they're conducting a test. Is it automated? I don't know. But it works. It's fun. It definitely puts you into a time and place, that's for sure, in a very iconic way, to think about the 1950s and fear of nuclear blast. I don't think him getting into a lead-lined fridge is any crazier than other things that have happened all throughout the series.
Right.
And it leads to the iconic image of him standing on a hill looking out at the blast, which I'm happy to have as a iconic image of Indiana Jones. But yeah, I think this movie is a lot of fun. I like the MacGuffin. I will say, even though I've already said Last Crusade is my personal least favorite of the whole series, I do think Kingdom of the Crystal Skull has my all-time least favorite moment in the entire series. And that's Mutt swinging on vines with a bunch of monkeys.
Yeah.
If I could erase that moment from my mind completely, that would be fantastic. Much less from a movie, just to have it out of my mind that it ever happened.
Yeah.
It's just way too dumb of a moment. But I'll throw this in general. There are moments that I wish had a bit more, well, a bit less gloss to them. I think
Yeah.
Giannis Kaminsky, shoots his first Indiana Jones movie here, he worked with Spielberg all the way back on Schindler's List and has worked with them in practically everything since. And
Yeah.
he's an incredible cinematographer, a really terrific cinematographer. And Kingdom of the Crystal Skull has a bunch of. Overall, I think it's a well shot movie, and I like it, but I think it goes a little too far and glossy at other times too. There's kind of this weird mixture because I mentioned all the sets of Last Crusade are not feeling like we're in these locales as much. A little bit less sense of adventure. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull has a lot better sets and sometimes an overly exaggerated sense, but I think it's kind of fun and terrific going all out on these tombs and various locations that I think work really well. There's a lot more sense of gravity to it, but then at other times we're racing through the jungle and it doesn't feel quite as tangible.
Right.
It's a little bit too ludicrous that they've raced forever through the jungle with that vehicle ahead of them that's making a trail way too conveniently. And they're massacring that jungle based on how far they go, just crushing through there. But I do think this movie has an interesting look. I just think you can't beat Raiders or even Temple of Doom in terms of their look
Right.
and the production design and, as you mentioned, the overall aesthetic, I think, is higher there. But I think Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is above Last Crusade even in that regard. Um, Before I even say too much more, I'll let you say your piece about the non-Dan Aykroyd movie here.
Well, I definitely don't hate this one at all. I enjoy it quite a bit. But it is kind of up to a point because for me, the first probably half of the movie, maybe give or take, is pretty good, uh, even bordering on great. And then some things about the last I don't think are bad per se at all, um, but I'm not as crazy about in terms of just story and some of the character reveals and uh, going towards the back half. But the kind of going with the Nuketown opening, I really enjoy that, like top to bottom. Uh, it's just a really fun opening sequence, and from the reveal of Indy to the Russians, just the Russians themselves being the enemies in this one, and it was kind of a fun departure. I think in Last Crusade, the Nazis being the bad guys again kind of felt, like a layup. It just kind of felt too easy. Whereas, you had the thuggy cult in Temple of Doom. You had quite a bit different variety of villain in that, and people kind of balked at it. Now you got the Russians because the time period, um, Cold War, and everything with that. So you've got Cate Blanchett as Spalko, and I think that she's pretty great. She's great anyway. She's a great actress, but I think she's a pretty cool villain. It's interesting for her to have like these supposedly psiotic, be part of like a psiotic division of the KGB. I find that kind of interesting. I like the big Russian guy, and I enjoy his little bouts with Indy in that opening, and even later on in the movie. I really enjoy that blast off. It's very cool. The whole chase through Area 51 warehouse. There's just so much fun action, like right there at the beginning, that it's almost like more action and more better paced action in most of Last Crusade combined. And I know people are gonna crucify me for that one. But just like in that opening 10-20 minutes. I really like Ray Winstone. I think he's great actor. That was kind of like his golden age. He had a whole lot of movies at that point in the late 2000s, mid to late 2000s. His character Mac is really fun. I kind of wish we could get a little more sense of his past with Indy, like the adventures they went on in between. Him ultimately being kind of a double agent um, is a fun little detail in this one as well, and kind of him flip flopping back and forth is one of the more memorable and fun parts of this movie to me. It's silly, but I think it's like, it fits. 50s sci-fi movies were pretty silly. The tone of this one is pretty good. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It doesn't need to. It's not supposed to. It also isn't completely just a joke either, even though some people would argue that point. Where the movie kind of falls for me, well, even before we get there, I really enjoy more than just that opening scene, though. And that mushroom cloud, yes, that is like an iconic image. And I think, you know, it belongs with some of the iconic shots from Raiders, Too Many to Count, Temple of Doom. I, it's one of the most iconic shots of the series, for good or for ill. But I think it's an incredible shot. But I like the Marshall College stuff. I like, you know, Jim Broadbent is an enjoyable actor. I really like him, and he kind of plays this, not just the Marcus Brody replacement, but kind of a fill in, and he does a good job, and he has a little bit of character to him. You can tell he cares about Indy, but he also got a job to do. Feels compassion for what happens to Indy at the college, and at this point, Denham Elliott had passed away, so he was not going to be back as Marcus Brody. Connery, who has since passed, as we've talked about, but was just retired from acting at this point and was not going to return. So we learned that he's passed away. So two returning characters that maybe people were hoping to see in from Last Crusade did not pop up in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I think where this movie does fall flat for me is the relationship of Mutt and Indy. Now, I actually think that Shia LaBeouf and Harrison have good chemistry. I really enjoy them better in their first interactions. Like, I love that kind of 50s cafe fight. And motorcycle chase, all the stuff going on with that. I really enjoy that part of the movie, and some people might think it's silly, and I agree with you, it is, but I think it fits the tone of the movie. I really enjoy that sequence. But I also like them going through that tomb. I think there's some cool shots in that, like early on where they're looking for clues and stumble on some of the natives and some booby traps, and it's pretty cool. I like, them kind of developing a mutual respect for each other. But I'm not crazy about the fact that he's his son, and I and I do feel like that mileage may vary with that because I get why they did it. This is very much kind of a reunion movie in a way because I mentioned there are characters that didn't come back, but you got Marion Ravenwood back in this one. Karen Allen came back, and in a lot of ways, it's good to see her. I think she has a great personality. She's very charismatic, and I think she does a good job as Marion. But I don't fully know why she had to be in it and had to be involved. Like it didn't. It feels like it was because they wanted it to be, but it doesn't really feel as natural to me. And then of course, the fact that he's her son, which does make sense. And ends up being Indy son makes sense, but I'm just not the biggest fan of it. And it kind of makes it all about, well, he's my son, and well, it's been a long time since we've been together. I'm just not a huge fan of that aspect of it. But I don't think it's terrible. I think there's some enjoyable moments. I like anytime you got to use a snake as a rope, uh, it's with Indy, it's pretty great. The comedy there was pretty good. I completely agree with you with the worst part of the whole series being him swinging with the monkeys. Uh, please, just can we get a special edition that has that removed? Uh, you want to change other things from other movies. Can we just uh, get rid of the monkeys and make that the only version available without them? But no, I like that chase though. I like that whole action bit in the jungle. But I agree with you that when it is in the jungle, that it just kind of feels off. And I was really looking forward to this one having more jungle stuff because I'm a big jungle adventure fan. I love the idea of just being out in the elements and the wildlife and just all the crazy different things you could stumble onto. I really enjoy those in films and stories in general. I don't think they really played enough with it in this. It's just kind of too streamlined to that chase and their little camp. It never really went much further than that. And I did like the sets with the temple. I like um, the last section of the movie is pretty fun and pretty good. I do. In a lot of ways, I like the way that Spalko goes out more than Donovan does because it feels a little more earned, and she's a little worse of a villain. I mean, not worse, quality wise, but I think like she's a little. I guess better villain is the better way to put it, but I mean like does a little worse things and actually uh, has built up kind of the ire and anger uh, to a point that makes sense for Indy to be at odds with her. To get to that point, you got Mac betraying him, helping him, betraying him, and then he meets his end. There are some satisfying bits in Crystal Skull, and I don't think it gets enough credit. I think people like to rag on it a little bit too much. I do understand why it's not everybody's cup of tea, though. I do think that the jump from the 30 serial, 40 serial aspect of it, and the religious artifacts, and although this is a religious artifact, it's just different. But the jump to aliens may have been too much of a jump for some people, but at the same time, I do not think that this is not Indiana Jones. It is. It's very much Indiana Jones. It's very good adaptation to that era. I do. I do understand why it threw people off, and maybe people were expecting something else. And sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to accept something based on what it is, not what your expectations were. And I think that that's kind of been lost in the hype world we live in, especially where trailers for movies get millions of views now, and people almost like have reviewed the movie in their mind watching their trailer. Uh, and that's more so the case now than it was uh, 13 years ago uh, when Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out. But it was the case then as well, that we were very much at the dawn of the YouTube era, and trailers being released on YouTube was a normal thing. And it wasn't like when we were talking Star Wars and Phantom Menace, where you had to get on QuickTime and download a trailer. It took like 5 hours because you were on dial-up internet. Like, no, by the time Crystal Skull came out, it very much um, instantaneous. And
Oh no, mom's expecting a call. I have to stop downloading the trailer.
yeah, yeah. Um, but by the time King of Crystal Skull came out, it was very much the time of trailers being available. And of course, anytime you have a series that comes back after a long hiatus, especially one as beloved as Indiana Jones, you're gonna have expectations. And sure, you're gonna have unrealistic expectations because especially if you're a big fan, and it's yeah, it's probably not gonna be as good as you want it to be, but it doesn't mean it's terrible. And I think and I do think there are people that just simply don't like it, and for those reasons, they might have their reasons, and I don't think their opinion's invalid. I do think there are people that rag on it the same way they ragged on the prequels, and simply because it just wasn't what they wanted, and they didn't even give it a chance for what it was. So I I do think that's the case for a lot of it. I myself kind of fall in a category where I really enjoy it. I don't think it's as good as the first three movies, but or as where they fall for me, and I do think it's a little bit below them in terms of quality, but I still think it's very good. And I really enjoy it, and I don't. I did have some things I was disappointed with in the movie. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is just it's got its own voice, and it does its own thing, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be Raiders all over again. It doesn't have to have the father son dynamic, although it has a different one. And I'm not even crazy about that, but a lot of people just hated it on principle, and I don't understand it. For me, it's a B plus. It just it's really good. It just kind of falls short of what exactly I wanted, but I'm definitely able to enjoy it for what it is. And as you were mentioning, for you and Indy, for me, it's not something I dread getting to if I watch all of them. I really enjoy it, especially like that first section. I have a fun time watching it, and I had a fun time at the theater. It wasn't even a question of having to to watch it multiple times before I accepted it. I mean, I enjoyed it on first viewing. I had some reservations, and they're kind of the same that I have now. And I have watched this the least of all of them, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's been out. It hasn't been out for nearly as long as the other ones. It's relatively new. Um, I've only watched it probably, 5, 6, maybe 7 times. Um, Whereas, like, I grew up watching the other three almost religiously, watched them all the time. So Harrison, which we haven't even talked about him. Well, there's, I think mileage varies on what people think of older Harrison Ford. Do you think that he's phoning it in because he's very grumpy? And sometimes that grumpiness bleeds into his performances. But in this case, I think it fit, and I think um, I liked his older Indiana. I enjoyed him in this movie quite a bit. Um, I think he looked just as good doing the action. Now, obviously, he wasn't going to be doing quite as many of the stunts as he did in the uh, the original three, and that's okay. At that point, he's in his 60s. You don't expect that. Um, now we've got another one coming out, and he's even older. So we'll see how that turns out and what they do with it. But ultimately, I enjoy this one quite a bit, and there are plenty of aspects that I like. I like John Williams' score. I think it's pretty good. It may even be a little bit better than his Crusade score. Um, it's got a little bit of a flair to it. I like kind of the sense of mystery. Again, it kind of goes with that different era, different style, um, but still Indiana Jones at the same time. It has a lot of kind of more eerie and mysterious cues than just straight up adventure all the time. But I think it works really well, and I definitely enjoy this one. I yeah, I don't know why it's as hated as it is, although I do understand why it's not everyone's cup of tea.
I have to say that echoing a couple things or going off at a couple things that you also mentioned, Cate Blanchett's one of my favorite actors, and I really like her in this movie.
Yeah,
I love the way she has her hairstyle and everything. I think it's hilarious. They talked about Harrison was confused when he met her without the hair, and he saw this blonde woman talking to him, and he's like, "Who is it?" Like, oh, it's the person you've been acting with all this time, Cate Blanchett. That's hilarious. Especially because she's Cate Blanchett, like
right,
it's not like she's a nobody. She's already an very established performer at that
right,
point.
right.
Um, but I really enjoy her in this movie a great deal. Um, I love having Karen Allen back, and I enjoyed the way that that dynamic plays out, where there's some drama, but mostly it's just like, yeah, we've had these years, but we're kind of accepting of these years between us, accepting of the fact that we may have had our ups and downs, but now we're here together, and we like being together. That dynamic between Indiana and Marion, I think, is really terrific. I love Ray Winstone. I think he's a great actor. I don't care for his character in this movie. And I don't hate his character in this movie. It's just so nothing. But just because, like, you don't know, like, where his motives are and why they let him. He just says, like, "Hey, Andy, remember that previous adventure we had where I was a triple A? Like, that's what we're doing here. So let me go back on with you." And Andy, and it's like, "Yeah, sure." And I'm thinking, no, don't trust that guy. Don't trust him. Don't let him go along with you and leave trackers along the way. secretly. Like I don't know why they ever trusted him, but it's fine. I don't hate it. I just think it's kind of like eh. Um, Meanwhile, John Hurt is one of my favorite actors too. This movie is overloaded with a brilliant supporting cast, and John Hurt is phenomenal. And I kind of wish we had more of him, or practically any of him, actually in the right state of mind, so we could get a better sense of that even at the end. But by the time the end gets going, it's just too much. So they don't have any space for him to be in the right state of mind. But I wish they had found a way to make that work, because I think it would have also helped with the story, like having even more resonance. Because that's one of the driving points of the whole story is that we're trying to save this guy, Oxley, trying to save him, and to know who he is that much more would help drive that home. And speaking of, Shia LaBeouf is obviously a character. His character Mutt is like really affectionate towards Oxley, and when he sees like the room with all the scrolling all across the walls and everything, thinking that Oxley's completely out of his mind, it hurts him so much it just instantly brings tears to his eyes. And it'd be nice if we saw more of Oxley for that to register. But meanwhile, I actually really do like Shia LaBeouf in this movie. I hate the monkeys, but I really like him in this movie, and I understand mileage may vary about um, the actual father son thing or aspect of how he came into being, but I kind of like it, and I also like when they're on the bike and the being chased, and the Brody's head comes off, the statue comes off,
Yeah.
and Mutt looks over at it like kind of smiling. He looks over at Indiana, and he's giving him the exact same. Indiana's giving Mutt the exact same disapproving stare that Sean Connery gave
Yeah.
Indiana back in Last Crusade, and that's obviously before in the story that that's a father son thing. But it's a brilliant little detail that I actually really like. Uh, I never got the feeling that they were trying. Some people thought that didn't like him, didn't like Mutt because they thought they were trying to make it his series. And they even teased that at the end a little bit when he starts to pick up the hat. But I never really, I mean, I could be wrong, but I never really got the feeling that's what they were doing. Not completely, anyway, to make it a Mutt Williams series, which I wouldn't really be a fan of, honestly. But I like
Yeah.
him in this story, but I don't want to see Mutt Williams and
Yeah.
not really digging that. But yeah, I never really got that feeling in the movie. So I guess that's also a matter of expectation,
Right.
too. If you're expecting that they're trying to shove Shia LaBeouf into your face as the new hero, then you might be irritated at him without giving him a fair shake as his own character.
Yeah.
But regardless of any of that, I think it works well enough. Even though I'm irritated, like that they a little bit at the jungle chase not feeling too real. I do actually really like the action within.
Yeah.
It's really good, and it builds too. Like this is Spielberg uh, at some of his peak in terms of just action, building off of action, one sequence to another. That chase leading to the ants, the giant ants. It's
Right.
really,
Yeah.
I really love that sequence. It's beautifully absurd too, like having the ants drag off a human body into there. But like it's fun. I really like it. And it also has that kind of horror aspect that Indiana Jones has often had, like little, like ants crawling all over somebody and down their throats as they're screaming. Those kinds of gory little details in a PG-13 way, but
Right.
still so much fun. And this movie, it feels over the top in those kinds of ways. And I understand where some people might be bothered by that in some aspects of the movie, but I don't like every part of it. When it's like 3 times it drops, and it's like, yeah, we're not just gonna have a waterfall, we're gonna have 3 waterfalls. And it feels just the movie has fun with it and it moves really fast, but it's just a little bit too unreal to me. But it's not just that it's unreal, it's that it doesn't feel like we're watching stunts as much as we're watching huge, CG kind of effects happening, where it feels just a little bit too glossy in that sense. And that glossiness is what kind of doesn't work as well to me. But I do like a lot of parts of this movie when they first go investigating, like where Indiana and Mutt are kind of crawling through these tombs, and they're being chased unbeknownst to them at first, or being followed. I really like a lot of the details that happen in the tomb. I think there are actually a whole lot of neat details in this movie, and a lived-in kind of look to a lot of the production design. Which again, I think the production design is a step above what the Last Crusade has. I also understand where this movie doesn't work for everybody, and if you're not digging, especially the leap forward in era and the change in having aliens involved and so forth, and yeah, that's not gonna maybe work for you, and that'll kind of ruin a whole lot of things. But I always say exactly what you were hinting at, that you kind of got to meet a movie where it's at and what it's actually trying to do, rather than criticizing it based on your expectations. And I kind of really like what this movie does. I do think that it loses some steam in the final act compared to how well a lot of it is, but it never completely falters. I just think it loses some steps. And it's frustrating when you think about how much time they spent behind the scenes trying to find a MacGuffin that everybody agreed on, and writing script after script after draft. And then you get to something that they eventually film and it still feels undercooked. but the final act kind of has that feel to me a little bit. But the pacing is part of what makes the movie work too, or work better. It's kind of a mixed bag in some ways, in terms of what works and what doesn't work for me. But I mean, overall, like, I still think it's a fun movie and has so much that I enjoy, and little moments that I find are quite fun. I will throw out there that I feel like Adventures of Tintin is actually a better adventure movie than either Last Crusade or Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I've really enjoyed Adventures of Tintin an awful lot. I think Spielberg had more fun than he probably expected doing that kind of animation style. But regardless of which, it's not like I don't like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Alien Stink Eye and all. But it's yeah, I give it a solid B. So it's the same grade I give The Last Crusade, even though I'd put it just a notch, just a tiny fraction better for me. But they're both, to me, in the exact same sort of camp. of having problems, but I still really dig them. It's not like I won't watch them when I watched the Indiana Jones movies. Um, Raiders and Temple of Doom are still at the top. Raiders is the tip top as far as being like one of those absolutely perfect movies. But if I'm going to watch the Indiana Jones movies, I'll happily watch all of them. Really, I don't. I don't think that any of them are bad in any way. That I wouldn't want to watch them. I think they're very enjoyable, and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is happily among them. And I guess we'll have to see what the fifth one will ultimately bring. I've heard, or I've seen, like behind the scenes things that included like Nazi symbols and so forth. So I don't have any idea what they're doing story wise. I can't wait to see a trailer or something that will get millions and millions of views and full reviews in a movie before it even comes out. As you alluded to, people will know how they feel before they even see it.
Oh yeah, they already know how they feel in a certain extent as well, because now it's even you get the gut reaction before you even see a trailer. Um,
Yeah,
you've already had people hating on it just for the idea of it. I think that like maybe they feel like they've been cheated or something out of what they wanted in the past and are afraid they're going to get burned again. But this isn't a relationship, it's a movie, and you don't have to enjoy it, but you don't have to ruin you definitely don't have to ruin it for everyone else who might want to enjoy it. And that's just a mentality that nobody has anymore. And sadly enough, or people still have, people do like to enjoy movies and let other people enjoy movies, but unfortunately, there's a loud minority that like to ruin things on the internet for people and to shove their opinions down people's throats. I am interested to see what the future has for this series and what will more than likely be the last. Definitely the last with Harrison, unless they just turn around and make another one instantly. But I think that they've hinted that this will definitely be the final movie, um, as far as he goes. And so I do have no idea what they're gonna go with. I think James Mangold is very capable uh, director. I really enjoy him. I'm interested to see what he brings to it. I think that people that hate Kathleen Kennedy need to just go watch some credits of these movies and realize that maybe she's actually been involved with this series for a long time. Um, so she's not just going to come out of nowhere and ruin it for you.
the whole time.
Maybe she knows what she's doing. Or, maybe go back and watch a lot of movies from your youth or the past that maybe Spielberg directed or produced, or and then look at the credits and see who a prominent producer is on a lot of them. But anyway, I think that ultimately you can't even just judge a movie on a trailer. You got to wait until you see a movie. So I never really fall too hard on something. Like sometimes I may not be interested in seeing something or reading something or playing something because it just doesn't appeal to me. But if it's something, and then I'll do it later and I'll love it. But when it comes to like movies of a franchise that I know I'm going to go see because I'm just invested at this point. This is the fifth movie. I'm definitely going to go see it. I saw the other four. I love them. Um, you know, but I'm not gonna be sold on whether it's good or bad until I see the movie. Um, trailers can definitely get you excited, but um, they're absolutely not indicators of quality. Um, because you can have a great trailer and have a subpar movie. We talked about that with Godzilla. Uh, you know, you can have terrible trailers and have a great movie. Uh, so you just never know what you're going to get. I am interested to see how this fifth one plays out. And I really enjoyed watching these four again, and it was kind of a fun way to celebrate 40 years of this character uh, being in pop culture and in our minds and imaginations and being alive for most of it, and being able to enjoy these movies and enjoy this character as much as I have. It was really fun to kind of revisit them and talk about them with you. I do think that the two we talked about today are the least of the four, but by any means, I do not think that these are bad movies, like we've said. And I think, particularly Last Crusade, a lot of people view it as the best, and they might listen to what we're saying about it today and think that, oh, they just hate it. They don't like it because it's the popular one. Like that's not the case at all. Like, we're not trying to be controversial. They're just, not everything works for everybody the same, and not everyone's favorite thing is going to be the same. Um, but I do love these movies. I love Last Crusade, and I even love Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which is controversial, I guess, to someone, but I don't care. Um,
It's controversial to the loud masses or the
right,
loud groups on the internet.
right, and that's it. And I really don't care about that. So I, but I just enjoy these movies, and I hope that the next one will be fun. I hope that that it'll be a proper send off. I don't know what that would mean. I don't particularly want it to be a retread of things we've seen before, but maybe it will be, and maybe it'll be done in a way that's good. Does something fresh too. Maybe it's going to be completely different. Maybe it's going to be, I think it's either going to be set in the 60s or 70s. Um, there's a whole other era. Maybe they're going to try to do what they did in Crystal Skull as far as trying to adapt the style to the decade it's in. Um, I don't know. I don't. I don't know anything about it outside of the behind the scenes images we've seen, which have been cool to see that they're actually filming the movie, and that it's really happening. But no clue as to what it's going to be, and I honestly like that. I really don't want to know anything about it until a trailer hits, and even then, I don't even know if I want it to reveal too much. I kind of want to go in on it fresh, and um, I'm going to try to stay off the internet too much and not get people's preordained opinions ingrained in my mind.
Yeah, I have loved this character in a series my entire life, and it has been fun to revisit them as I have many times before. Same with you. I've seen Kingdom of the Crystal Skull the least, but it's only because it's not been out my entire life. Kind of hard to see something as many times when you grew up watching the movies. But I enjoy the entire series. It's funny because like Raiders is easily the top, It's one of my all-time movies. I think it's pretty much perfect. I get a real joy out of watching it every single time. But when I watch the sequels, even though I can, grade them on various levels lower, I still really have fun spending time in this world and with this character. So I wouldn't trade that for anything. I think that's pretty
No.
perfect. And none of them have like disappointed me so much that it's raped my childhood, as some people would put it. It's not anywhere near that bad. Um, I mean, you could have a moment like swinging with monkeys, and that moment can be really terrible.
Right.
If I could just pick that one moment, then I'd be like, yeah, uh, oh man, why did it ever happen? But in all seriousness, though, like all the movies I have a lot of fun with. I enjoy them, and I think it's Harrison Ford has done a lot of different kinds of movies. I think he's a better actor than people sometimes even give him credit for.
Right.
At times, he's been in some really terrific things, but Indiana Jones is like his most iconic part to me. Like that is what I think of when I think of Harrison Ford first, and it's really perfect for him because he's charming, but he's also got you know the willingness to be beat up, unafraid to be older too. Like he even mentioned in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, he's like, make more references to my age in the script.
Right.
And I'm not gonna dye my hair. I don't know why people are so afraid of aging, especially in America. Like people have so little respect often for older people.
Right.
And he's like, I don't know why people have that, but he said, hey, I'm still going to be me. I'm still going to work out and be fit and eat right and be Indy. And I think that's still the case. Spielberg said that watching like Last Crusade and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, that Harrison was basically on the exact same fitness level, doing stunts and running around.
Right.
Harrison is an amazing actor as Indiana. But yeah,
Yeah.
looking forward to future adventure, but also happy to rewatch these four. So, my friend, thank you for being here with me, and thanks everyone for tuning in on Movie Marathon Mood.